Am I good to start? All right. Hello, everyone. I hope you guys are having a good day. Did you all enjoy lunch? Yes? Yes? How did we rate the food out of 10? Like 10? 10 out of 10? Awesome. Solid. All right. So today I'm going to be doing essentially a very, very rapid fire crash course into UX projects. And we're going to go through the quick and dirty version of the entire UX design process from start to finish. And hopefully this will help you guys when you're thinking about the projects you're working on at Technica and maybe beyond. All right, so before we jump into the actual workshop, who the heck am I? And why should you listen to me? So my name is Kat Close. I have been working in the field of UX UI for about 4 years now. I teach product design at the University of Maryland. I have an introductory course, and I've held varying levels of positions throughout my career so far. Currently, I'm the chief product officer at a startup called Wise Cities, and I'm the lead UX designer at another startup called Sociable AI. If you have any questions about those startups, feel free to ask me afterwards, but that's just a little bit about who I am. But we are not here to talk about me today. We are here to talk about user experience. So I'm going to go ahead and hop into that. Just to break down how this presentation is going to work, about the first, I'd say 15, 20 minutes are just going to be me talking. And then at the end, I'm going to give you guys the opportunities to just like ask any questions that you would like. This presentation comes with a bunch of examples and photos of like how you do things. So hopefully that can be a helpful resource for you all as you move forward. But yeah, so let's start. What is UX? Well, user experience refers to the quality of the comprehensive and contextual experiences users have when interacting with a product. Notice it has nothing to do with design. It is just how users, take steps to engage with or interact with an interface, a physical product, or a service. That entire process and experience is the user experience. Where design comes in is user experience design, which is the process that design teams use to influence those experiences. Now, note how I say influence, right? Not create or make, right? It's very, very important before we get into how to do things that you understand that as a UX designer or as a product manager, a product lead, product owner, a developer, right? You cannot design user experience. Why? Because it refers to the user's subjective impression of a product that is fully subjective, up to their mind. But what you can do is you can create conditions that are more likely to lead to a positive impression. And that is what UX designers and researchers and design devs do, right? Is we just try to create conditions within the product itself that lead to the most positive outcome and most positive experience possible. So how do we do that? Well, good UX design aims to make products that are useful, right? That are usable, intuitive, that are desirable. The users actually have a need and a want to use them. Findable, they're easily able to navigate and find information. Accessible and credible, right? However, great UX design takes it a step further. It's about what users think and feel throughout the entire process. It depends on the context in which the product is used, which can change and fluctuate. It can also change over time as society and technology progresses. It is an ongoing process. It never ends. And it is about looking backwards about what has been done and forwards about what can be done. And finally, and it's very important for you all to understand this, is that UX design is a business strategy. UX is what sells, or is a big component of what sells products, right? Nobody is going to want to use a product that isn't usable or enjoyable to use, right? All right, so that's just a little bit of background context. Now we're going to actually go into the crash course of the UX design process, right? Which is broken down into 3 parts: empathizing, designing, and testing. So within the empathizing section, you have defining your problem, you have your research that you do to inform what you're building, and then you have the analysis of that research. In the design phase, that's where you start ideating ideas, creating prototypes, creating visuals of what your product is. And then finally is the validation part, where you test your product to make sure it actually does what it's supposed to do. So to summarize, you first understand the problem, you research the facts, you design the solution, you test your solution, and then you just optimize, rinse, and repeat. It never ends, unfortunately. You might leave the team, but the team will still continue to do this. All right, so Um, we're going to go through each of these steps, and this is like a very condensed version of the UX design process and each step that you go through to get a project from start all the way to finish. And it starts with generative research. Now, at this point in time, you or your team may have identified a problem in the real world. Either you experienced it, or a member of your team experienced it, or somebody you know experienced it, or you just have heard about it out there and you want to take steps to solve it, right? Before you're able to actually define what that problem is, you need to understand that problem, become an expert in it. So generative research is the research you do before you know what you're going to do. And it helps you figure out your problem statement and your user group, right? Which are the two things you need to know in order to make a solution. Methods include interviews, focus groups, surveys, observational studies, and literature reviews. And the process of this and all user research studies are: first, you define the problem and the information you want to learn. You select the method you're going to use, you plan and prepare, you actually conduct the study, you collect the data, and then you analyze. How do you keep track of all that? Through what we call a user research study plan or an interview plan. That would take a whole workshop in and of itself to discuss. So if you have questions about how to put that together, feel free to ask me after the workshop, or you can email me and I'd be happy to talk through that. But okay, so you've done some digging, you've casually gotten to know more about your problem. It's now time for you to actually define the problem. And that's where problem statements come in. Problem statement is a concise description of the problem that needs to be solved. Good problem statements are specific and short. They mention the target audience and their goals, needs, and wants. And they mention stakeholder constraints like budget or time. It includes the problem, what actually is the problem context, the affected group, and the significance. Why is this problem important? Who is it impacting and in what way? Why does it prevent a person from being able to live their daily lives, right? So this is an example of a problem statement. You'll see it's no more than like 2 or 3 sentences. It mentions who is experiencing the problem, which is sales reps, potential customers or leads, and the business. It mentions the problem itself in the first sentence. It gives the context of why the problem is happening and in what user scenarios in the next 2 sentences. And the last sentence is, why should any of us care about the problem and about solving it, right? That is a standard breakdown of your problem statement. All right, you have defined your problem statement. What next? Well, now it's time to get to know the people who actually experience the problem, or your users. And you do that through user research. User research reveals how users behave and why they behave in that way, to replace any assumptions you might have in your head about, okay, I think they do this because of this, right? If you build a product on assumptions, you will lose a lot of money and a lot of time, right? Because you don't know if they're true or not. So it's much better to actually get to know the facts and to get to know your users. So user research discovers user needs and priorities, what's most important to them. It uncovers the use case context. Do they have access to phones? Do they have access to the internet? Maybe they're using it when they travel versus when they're at home, right? You want to know those things. It uncovers user mental models, or how they perceive the world and how they categorize things and interact with things. It understands what segments and groups you have within your overall user population. And it gets to understand users as humans, because at the end of the day, the best solutions are those that are designed for everyday people, not this theoretical user, right? Just normal human beings. Once again, because this is research, you'll need either an interview plan or a user experience study plan, right? Okay, so you've gone out into the real world, you've talked to your users, you understand who they are, and you understand what groups there are within your target population. What do you do now? Well, you can take that information and create a tool that's called a persona. A persona is a fictional representation or archetype based on collected data that embodies the behaviors and priorities of real user groups that you discovered during your research, right? It's important to note, this isn't a fictional character. You're not pulling this out of your brain, right? So this is not from your imagination. This is not your imaginary friend, right? This is based in research. It is a fictional person that you put together that is representative of the entire user group that you are trying to target, right? Most times projects will have 2 to 3 of these, right? They might have a primary persona that they're targeting or a secondary persona, right? What's the importance of this? Well, this helps you be able to design and build solutions without actually having to go out and talk to users, right? Sometimes you can just open up the user persona and say, oh, they would do this in this case based on this persona and the research we've already done. So we can design it in this manner, right? And then you go out and test. So this is a shortcut to save you time. And this is an example of how you would put one together. Again, I believe the slides should be available to you afterwards, so you can feel free to use this as a reference. All right, so you know who your personas are, right? Let's say they're called Ethan, or in this case, this is the persona that I use to put together what's called a storyboard, right? A storyboard is the next step. How do your users interact with the problem they're experiencing? You want to be able to visualize that, picture it, and articulate it. And that's what storyboards help you do. They're a visual representation of a persona's interaction with the problem or your product, right? So this is an example that I made. You understand that you don't need to have artistic skills to be able to put one of these together. Stick figures are fine. What matters more is that you understand what's happening and you're able to explain it. When does the user encounter the problem? How does it make them feel? How do they go about trying to solve it? And then how might your solution help them solve it? What might it address, right? So you want to have, it's like a comic strip, essentially. You have a comic little image and then you have a description, right? Explaining what's happening. For those of you who, and including me, who don't have artistic skills and nobody can tell what's happening, right? All right, so now you understand the scenario, you understand your users, you understand the problem, you understand how they come together in a scenario or an experience, right? What do you do next? Well, you have everything that you need. Oh, that is my alarm. You have everything that you need to put together a hypothesis. Now, who's familiar with hypotheses? I'm sure all of us learned about these in middle school science class. Well, funnily enough, this is no different, right? This is where you distinguish between your assumptions and what you actually know is fact, right? Because again, you build a product on assumptions, you will lose a lot of time and a lot of money, right? So what you do is you put together what you know about your user and their need and the problem. What do they need in order to solve this problem? How does this problem impact them? Then you come up with an if-then statement or a hypothesis about how you solve that. If the user experiences this problem in this context, then if we provide this type of solution, or if we do this, or if we help them overcome this, then the problem will be addressed, or they will experience shorter times or shorter wait times, or they'll be able to solve it easy. You know, you get the idea. The important thing is that once you come up with your hypotheses, you go out into the real world and you find really small ways to test them with actual people. And if you learn that your hypothesis is correct, then you know, okay, if I invest time and resources into building out the solution, it'll turn out pretty much okay. But if you don't, then you know you should have back away from that idea before you waste your time, right? So this is an example of how you put together a hypothesis table. You have your need, your hypothesis, the test, how it went, how you plan on testing it, and what you learned. Okay, now notice we are midway through and we haven't even touched design yet. And that's because UX design is a little bit misleading, right? The entire first half of your project is going to be research, understanding how things are, right? Getting yourself outside of your mind and into the mind of your users and their experiences. Once you have done that and you have become a quote unquote expert on the problem, then you can start thinking about designing your solution. And that begins with ideation. Ideation is the creation of a broad range of ideas around a specific topic with no attempt to judge or evaluate them. And that's very, very important. This is where you're just brainstorming stuff, right? Your hypothesis will let you know, okay, if we do this, then it'll lead to a positive outcome. Well, what does this look like? That is ideation. It's coming up with what does this look like, right? Methods include brainstorming, Scamper, mashup, mind mapping, and sketchstorming, right? And once it's very, very, very important that while you're coming up with the ideas, there's no judgment involved. You want to come up with the craziest, most insane ideas possible. Time box yourself so you don't get overload of ideas, but you're not trying to constrain yourself by feasibility at this point. Once you have come up with all of the ideas with your team, then and only then do you sit down and you evaluate them. Methods of that includes the strength, weakness, opportunities, and obstacles, a matrix, Moscow matrix, dot voting, now, wow, how matrix for categories. Again, we could spend an entire workshop on those things alone, but for the sake of time, I'm providing you the names so that you can do a little bit of your own digging after the fact. Now, it's very important for you guys to remember that when you're doing ideation, you always want to start with the how might we question, right? How might we solve this? How might we build this? How might we do this, right? The might is important because if you say, how will we or how can we, you're limiting yourself to what is known and what is possible. And you want to throw that out the window. You want to be as imaginative as possible, so don't limit yourself with a question that is inherently limiting. Okay, you have come up with your ideas and you want to proceed forward. It's time for you to start building the foundation of your product. How do you do that? Well, if you're building a digital product, you'll start with user flows. User flows are a visual depiction of the path a user will take to achieve a particular goal through your product, right? Again, emphasizing this only applies to digital products, apps, websites, software examples. It usually starts with the user entering into the product and it ends with the user exiting the product after they have accomplished their goal and solved their problem. And it uses different shapes to depict pages of your platform, to depict decisions the user has to make, and to depict yes/no scenarios about how they will proceed. It shows their actions and it shows what direction they're moving with through arrows. So this is an example of what one of them looks like. These are super important to helping you make sure you do not miss things. I've had students in my class put together user flows and I'll take a look at them and like, how does the user log in? And they're like, oh, and I'm like, how does the user check out? And they're like, oh, right. So this is helpful in that case for helping you identify gaps in how the user progresses through your platform, right? Okay, but let's say you don't want to build a digital platform or a software application. Say you want to build a physical product. What do you do in that case? Well, you can create a user journey. And a user journey, prefacing with it is still applicable to digital products. You could do both. But if you have a physical product, then this is the way to go. User journeys are a visual depiction of a user's trip across the solution that calls attention to the user's experiences and emotions, right? Essentially, you break down the entire experience into stages, them becoming aware they have a problem, them researching how to solve the problem, them finding your solution and opting to go with it, them using your solution, and them giving you feedback, right? It shows that entire journey from start to finish. And it forces you to put yourself in the user's shoes. What are they thinking while they're experiencing this? What are they doing? What are they saying? How are they acting, right? And that's called an empathy map, right? So that helps you understand the user's point of mind as they are using your product and engaging with your platform. Okay, we have finally made it to 75% of the way through. And guess what we finally get to do? We get to design stuff. Lovely. So once you understand all of this and you have built a solid foundation based on research and based on understanding who you're solving for, you can go ahead and actually put together prototypes. Prototypes come in 3 fidelities, and we're going to go through them one by one. So lo-fi prototypes, actually, let's stop there. Let's rewind a little bit. What is a prototype? A prototype is an experimental model of a solution that is used to test or validate hypotheses quickly and cheaply to assist in design refinement, right? They have 3 fidelities. The first one is lo-fi, which uses very minimal time and resources. It typically is just a paper sketch or a very, very simple grayscale wireframe. And the whole point is to test basic functionality, layouts, user flows, and specific actions. When a user encounters this page, if it's laid out in this way, doesn't make sense. You can also have lo-fi for physical products, but I'm pretty sure all of you guys are comp sci working in the digital space, so I'm going to stick with this for the sake of time. So this is an example of one of those might look like. See, super simple, bare bones. It's just a scanned sketch, but it gives you idea of what that page might look like. So you finished your lo-fi. Now what? Well, before you can go to your mid-fi, you actually have to test it out, understand what works well, what doesn't work well, what can be improved, what is the user confused about, right? This is where testing comes in. And I know at the beginning I had testing all the way at the very end. Well, I will let you know that I would recommend that you test after each design iteration you come up with. Why? Because that prevents you from having to do rework later down the line when you're investing more time and resources. So it's time for your first usability test, which is the practice of testing how easy a design is to use for a group of representative users. It involves observing potential users trying to accomplish tasks using a specific design repeatedly across the development process to see how it's improving. The goals are to determine usability, to determine experience quality, assess performance, identify problems, and find additional solutions. You can either do this comparatively by comparing your product to a different product, exploratively, or testing your product in realistic scenarios to understand what could be improved, or evaluatively, understanding the intuitives of a new design. Once again, you need an interview plan or a study plan. Okay, you've tested, you understand what you can improve, what you could do better, what you're doing great. Now it's time to go back to your design, implement those changes and spice it up a little bit, right? Spruce it up a little bit, make it look a little bit nicer. And that's where you get your mid-5 prototypes. They use moderate time and resources. They are usually digital mock-ups with limited functionality, right? So some clicking here and there. And the whole purpose of them is to test the overall product functionality, navigation, user interactions, and specific user scenarios. They will also have some copywriting or the language that is used pre-filled, but they might not have images. They might not have colors, right? So this is an example of what the mid-fidelity prototype of that lo-fi I just showed you would look like. All right, you finished the mid-fi. Now it's time to test again. Why? Because you completed another design iteration, right? And it's important to note you might have several lo-fis that you go through and several mid-fis that you go to before you find the perfect solution, right? You want to test after each one, right? It's the same thing, but you're focusing on something different. Okay, finally, you have made it. You have tested it. You're very confident in your design. Now it's finally time to create the hi-fi. The hi-fi uses the highest amount of time and resources, and it is a complete digital or physical mock-up with extensive functionality. I should be able to use it and understand, okay, this is what this would do. This is what that would do. I should be able, as a user, to complete the full user journey through that platform. And this helps to understand what needs to be refined and what needs to be finalized before it actually goes and passes off to the devs for development, right? Okay, you made it, guys. We've done it. We've done it in time. But why does this all matter for you and for everyone else out there interested in building products? Well, UX increases success. For every $1 that companies invest in UX, they get $100 back in return, which is an ROI of, I think, 9,900%. Good UI can increase conversion rates up to 200%, but good UX can increase conversion rates up to 400%. 8 in 10 customers are willing to pay for better experiences. 72% of customers tell 6 or more people about positive UX experiences. It also matters in the reverse way. 88% of users are less likely to revisit websites after bad user experiences. That is way over the majority. Only 1 out of 26 customers complain about negative experiences, but 91% of those that don't complain just will leave. 91% of everyone who ever sees your product and has a bad experience with it will just leave. 62% of customers say they share bad experiences with others, which is kind of bad PR for you. And 94% of factors influencing whether a user's first experience with products are design-based, not functionality-based. So UX is pretty important across the board. It is a very good business strategy. It's a very good thing to keep in mind as you are building solutions to problems. And it gives you a framework to work within when you're approaching new projects and new design projects, right? All right, I have spoken very quickly. I hope you were able to catch everything, but I wanted to give you guys the opportunity to ask any questions that you might have or to revisit any of the slides that we just went through or any of the concepts. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So I will use Wise Cities, which is one of the venture that I'm CPO of right now. TLDR, Wise Cities, we're building a platform that connects older adults, so your grandparents, to senior serving resources in their local area to help them age at home in a healthy and happy manner. That is a digital interface for a population that struggles with technology a lot of the time. So user experience, really, really important. All right, so essentially what I did throughout this is we first started by getting to know our users. Okay, I'm not an older adult. I have no idea what the experience is like. I can't even imagine that. So I went out and I did, at this point, we have done over 350 interviews with different stakeholders, right? A large portion of them are with older adults at different stages of the project to get to understand who they are, how they live, what problems they experience on a daily basis, how they currently solve those problems, and where our project fits in to their life, right? So we started there. We also got to understand the user groups. There are some older adults who are younger, who are super tech savvy, and there are other older adults who are older and not super tech savvy, right? So we need to make sure we accommodate both of those personas in the design of our platform. Once we did that research and we understood the problem we were trying to solve, We drafted a problem statement, and based on that problem statement, we put together an initial design, right? So we created the personas, we created the user flows, we sat down, we created an initial design, and we came up with a lo-fi. We went out into the world, we tested the lo-fi, we got roasted the heck out of. And that happens. That's a part of UX design, right? Because sometimes you do things wrong. And as UX designers, you need to be able to bounce back from that and separate yourself from your projects and say, okay, this is not negative comments about me. It's just I didn't take the right approach. Let's listen and let's figure out what the right approach is. So we went back to the drawing board. We realized that we had some gaps in our research. So we went back out into the world and we did another round of research, right? To get to know more stakeholders, not just older adults, but the services we wanted to connect them with and governments and how they could help, right? Then we went back and we started the design process again from scratch. We came up with a new design, and this time we did testing more frequently. After each iteration, we went out, we did a testing event, we came back in, we learned, and we implemented those changes with the design. We went out, we tested, we came back, we learned, right? We went through 5 or 6 tests over the summer for this one platform to get to where it is today. And only after we felt pretty confident and we were getting pretty much 100% positive reviews when we went out, did we pass it off to the devs and say, hey, you can build this now. But even now that we have the first version of the platform live and ready to be used, we're still getting feedback because it never ends, right? There's always more to add. So we're just beginning the next round of research for version 2 of the platform and seeing how can we improve it from there. So that's a short kind of recount of a project that's kind of big that I've worked on that uses these same principles. Any other questions? No. Yes. Absolutely. So I will tell you a little bit about how I got involved to answer that question. I did not major in UX UI because when I went to the University of Maryland 5 years ago, they didn't have any degrees that were related to it at all. There was either computer science or graphic design. I went graphic design because coding and me don't quite mesh that well. So I went graphic design. I studied graphic design. That is the degree that I graduated with. But I knew that I wasn't learning everything that I needed to about UX. And that's the path that I wanted to go in. So right from the get-go, as soon as I could, I started applying to and looking for UX internships. Why? Because the best way to learn a hands-on discipline and a hands-on field is by working on it hands-on in the actual environment that you would be. And I was lucky enough in my sophomore year to get an internship. And I went to it and I learned from it. And I was like, wow, this was great. And I just did internship after internship after internship after that. And I essentially taught myself through these internships how to be a good UX designer. And that gave me enough knowledge to be able to then get positions in the real world, right? So other ways that can help you breach into this, there are a lot of boot camps out there. Google has a good boot camp. I think Adobe has a boot camp, right, that you can use. Some of them are paid, some of them are free. And that will kind of take you through the quick and dirty version of this, applying it to a real problem of your choice. Now, the important thing to know about boot camps is they are not a replacement for actual internship experience. You can't just do a boot camp and be like one and done. I'm now a perfect UX designer. I'm going to get jobs, because you probably won't. It is helpful to help you learn, but you need actual experiences to show that you are a credible designer. What else can you do? Personal projects, right? There are so many opportunities, especially at the University of Maryland, to find projects that you can work on that are more low key, that are student driven, but that give you exposure to these principles and allow you to test some of this stuff out, right? So I would definitely recommend doing that. So those are some ways that you can get your feet in the door, see if this is right for you. And if you are passionate about it, you fall in love with it like I did, then you can pursue it further. Any other questions? Yes. Yes. So I would say that your safest bet of starting out with for software is Figma when you're putting together prototypes, right? It used to be Adobe XD. Adobe XD was the simplest version. And then Adobe was like, we're giving up on this. We're buying Figma. And they bought Figma. And then they kind of let Adobe XD fall into the water. Figma is really simple. It's very straightforward. It has everything that you need to be able to learn. It has Google Docs like collaboration features, which is great for projects. And what else? It's free, right? There's a free version. So I would say you can definitely start with that. Other tools, FigJam is a great way to do online ideation. Pen and paper, obviously your best friend. Google Docs is going to be your best friend. Miro has some good collaboration tools as well. But yes, those are some that I would recommend. Is it on time? All right. So I think that's all that we have time for. I hope you found this interesting. Yeah, thank you for attending.